Let's just start with the overall question of people coming across the channel on those small boats, the so-called illegal migration problem. I think that with 45,000 people last year, this is unsustainable. I think it's not something that either of the main parties or any of the parties can simply say there is no problem here. There is a problem, and the question is how we resolve it.
There are 100 million people around the world who could qualify for protection under our current laws. Let's be clear, they are coming here.
Suella Braverman was talking utter nonsense when she said there's 100 million people around the world who want to come to Britain and might come here. That is inflammatory nonsense. However, what is true is that because of climate change, because of war, because of dictatorships, then there are an awful lot of people on the move around the world, and it is becoming easier to move around the world. And I think particularly because of climate change, mass migration is an issue that's not going to go away. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So there have to be some kind of solutions or answers to this. I'm very, very influenced by the work that's been done by Rob Ford, who's a politics professor at Nottingham, who's looked in some detail at public attitudes to this, and it's really interesting.
Today we are introducing new legislation to keep my promise to you, to stop the boats.
First of all, he says this slogan, "Stop the boats," won't work politically because there are two problems with it. First, they won't be able to, and second, the public will notice. But he also says that the public are genuinely worried about people breaking the rules, coming here outside the legal routes of migration, as it were, queue jumping. And that business of legality and rule breaking really matters to voters of all kinds. Interestingly, they are much, much less concerned about the raw numbers. So some kind of answer to this, which produced an increase in legal migration, but stopped the small boats coming and those people going up the beach off Dover, would be very popular indeed. I think this is not going to work, first of all, because in the end, you can't return so many people. How do you return people to Afghanistan who have fled the Taliban and who are desperate not to go back? What do you do about people who don't want to return to Yemen or Somalia with the civil wars there? And I've heard no answers to these questions. I was talking to an Iraqi journalist this week who was saying, literally, people will not go back. They'll throw themselves out of planes. They'll do anything not to be thrown back into Iraq. And so I think that is a very, very practical, fundamental human problem the government hasn't resolved. They'll end up in huge new camps on the south coast, and they will stay there for years, possibly. And this will be a great national sore and embarrassment and disgrace because they won't be able to get the people back. And then ministers say, well, what about the Rwanda scheme? Rwanda will take a few hundred of people, if best. So if that goes through all the legal hoops and the planes actually take off, then they're talking a tiny proportion of the number of migrants who've come across the channel going to Rwanda. That is not an answer either. The thing that really worries me is the subset of people who have been human trafficked, who are the victims of so-called modern slavery.
Our modern slavery laws are being abused by people gaming the system. We've seen a 450% increase in modern slavery claims since 2014.
Embarrassingly for the Home Secretary, the official Home Office figures came out very recently, and what they show is that of the 85,000 people who came across the Channel on small boats over the last 4 years, only 7% had a human trafficking claim assessed by the Home Office. You can't arrive on the beach and say, I'm the victim of modern slavery, let me in. You can't do that. It has to be a first responder, a police officer or an immigration official who looks at your case and says, I think you've been human trafficked, and then puts it into a process to be assessed. So of those 85,000 people, 7% were assessed in that way, hardly a huge majority. And of that 7%, by the way, the number of people whose claims have been judged to be justified is now something like 90%. It's gone up from about 56% at the beginning of the process to about 90% now. So the idea that there are huge numbers of people coming here claiming that falsely to have been trafficked by gangs and gaming the system is utter piffle. It's just not true. But what, of course, this new law means is that if you have been trafficked And we are living in a society where all around us there are the victims of modern slavery. They're in the car washes, they're in the nail bars, they're in brothels, they're in marijuana farms, they're in ordinary farming farms, they're on building sites. They're all around us, hiding in plain sight. Those people will no longer have any claim whatever to help from the state by saying, I'm a victim of slavery. A woman who has been raped 40 times in a brothel in the course of one day will not be able to go to the police and say, I'm the victim of human slavery, and get any kind of help from the state. Under this new law, you arrived here illegally, that's you out again, that's you locked up and then sent wherever it may be 28 days later. I think this is utterly shameful and really, really damaging.
I'll take that as a yes from the Prime Minister, that women who are the victims of sex trafficking will not be protected under our modern slavery laws. What a complete and utter disgrace, Mr. Speaker. But whilst it may shock, it shouldn't necessarily surprise, because this is the Tory government that in recent months has spoken of invasions.
If you arrive here illegally, you will not be able to claim asylum here. You will not be able to access the modern slavery system, and you will not be able to make spurious human rights claims.
We will always, of course, work within the bounds of international law, but we cannot allow this abuse of our system to continue.
So among the many problems facing this new proposed law is whether it's legal. And it's very, very interesting that in the sort of prologue, the official prologue to the bill that's been printed, the Home Secretary is unable to assert unequivocally that this is within the terms of Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights, which, of course, was signed after the Second World War, initiated by Britain, and has got nothing to do with the EU as such.
British civil servants had a major role in drafting the European Convention on Human Rights, which was signed in 1950.
So I assume that having had all these very, very clever government and other lawyers poring over this issue for weeks and weeks and weeks, and being unable to determine that it's legal, that it is probably not going to be in terms of the Convention and other obligations.
If the European Union believe that we've reneged on the European Convention on Human Rights, then they're likely to exercise their rights under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, and therefore disable us from all the practices that make it possible to do security and policing and arrest warrants.
Rishi Sunak is making up, or trying to make up, be friendly on the back of his very successful Northern Ireland deal with President Macron of France. But these are the kinds of issues that might kind of really mess things up for them again.
The numbers will continue to grow. They have more than quadrupled in just 2 years. It's a sign of what is to come, and our system will continue to be overwhelmed.
But because of his mess, there are thousands of people who can't claim asylum and can't be returned. So where does he actually think they're going to end up?
I don't know where this ends. What I have noticed is that the heat, the anger between the two parties, and in particular between the two main party leaders, is at a new level. And I think both are betting, in a sense, on this policy being noticed by voters. The Labour Party thinks that voters will notice this policy, hear the repetition of promises made by the Conservatives again and again and again, and will notice that yet again it hasn't worked, and that therefore the Conservatives will continue to be blamed for the migration crisis. The Conservatives are trying to flip that. They know that voters blame them for the number of people coming across in these boats, and they hope by this, they're all lefty lawyers, they're all, Islington so-and-sos who have no interest in what the British people think. They hope they can flip this, and it's a really big hope, and if they could, it would change things dramatically. I don't think they can. If you'd like to stay up to date, and you'd like to see the latest explainers, field reports, feature stories and special discussion episodes, then please, folks, subscribe to our channel today.